Hello and welcome. I am Kemuel Pascal and you are viewing One and One here on WESN Content Capital. In this episode of One and One, we will be exploring the issue of procurement in Trinidad and Tobago, an issue that is very much alive and burning with an ongoing debate as many stakeholders are calling for its full proclamation. Here in studio with us, we have the chairman of the Procurement Board of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Munina Lalchan. Mr. Lalchan, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pascal, and a pleasant good day to your viewing audience. And once again, it's a privilege to be at WESN Content Capital to share with the wider population.
Thank you, sir. So let's examine the history of it. So the act that preceded the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act is the Central Tenders Board Act, correct?
That's correct.
And so what we're doing now is moving the system from where it was before to an even better system.
Absolutely. And let me just add that not only is the Central Tenders Board, because a number of public bodies would have been excluded from operating under the CTB Act. And therefore, under Section 20A of the CTB Act, you would have had exclusions. And now, you had the SEMP manual, State Enterprise Monitoring Manual, that would have given guidance and directions to the public bodies that were involved in public procurement. So what you see happening is coming out of the Commission of Inquiry, the white paper, and all those different things, because the Central Tenders Board Act has been in existence since 1961.
Yes.
And therefore, you probably have certain practices that are not really up to date and fit for purpose. So what the Act of 1 of 2015 does is pull together all the different practices and identify who falls under the Act 3 definition of public bodies. So that really, in a nutshell, brings it together. And you would have had a number of consultations. It would have gone through Parliament, gotten the requisite approval and so on, and was passed in late 2014, so it's Act 1 of 2015. Yes. And then further to that, you would have seen the first part of the proclamation of certain elements of the Act in July of 2015 that actually paved the way for the setting up of the office and putting in place all the policies and procedures, guidelines, handbooks, and so on, including regulations to give effect to the Act. So when the board was appointed in January of 2018, all we were given was the Act. And therefore, we had to put everything in place. So that's how we came to where we are today.
At this point. And so give us an idea as to where we are at this point, because as I mentioned in opening, there are many people who are calling for the full implementation of the Act, and obviously the judiciary they have stated that there are several issues in terms of administrating it from their level. The business community has come out and they have also spoken about the Act and how crucial it is for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of where we are right now. The opposition has also come out in support of the Act, calling on the government to implement it fully. Obviously, we know there are some constraints because there are some things that still need to be worked on from a legislative standpoint in order for you all to be able to implement the Act fully. In August of 2018, even before we finalized the regulations, we issued one of our first set of bulletins, that's bulletin number 3. Or what we call advisory number 3. And advisory number 3 indicated that we should have under section 61(2) of the Act, named procurement officer who shall be responsible for public procurement and the disposal of public property under the Act. Now that is critical, and the reason why I'm saying that is that you need procurement officers to give effect to the procurement and disposal activities by the public bodies. So far, just as they got in, those public bodies being ministries and state enterprises, correct?
Well, you would be surprised to know who falls under the Act. And well, I'll give you an idea.
Yes, yes.
And then you'll put the context together. First one, Parliament.
Right.
Sorry, the President. That's the President of the country. The Parliament, even though we report to the Parliament and not to a ministry. The Judiciary. Then you go on to the ministries and department and division of the ministry. The Tobago House of Assembly and divisions of the Tobago House of Assembly. Municipal corporations, all 14. And then you go on regional health authority, statutory bodies, state-controlled enterprises, service commissions. And then it speaks to a body corporate or unincorporate in relation to any function which is exercised on behalf of the state. And then a body corporate, very important, a body corporate or unincorporate entity in relation to any function, project, scheme, or arrangement which involves the use of it by public money. And public money is, there's a definition for it, but I just want to focus on one element of the definition, which is under D. Distributed by a public body to a person. So any fund that goes to a person from a public body, for example, the Ministry of Sports, Sports TT,
yes,
give all these 15 sporting organizations funding, cricket, football, lawn tennis, and so on. They all fall under the Act. All NGOs, all the educational organizations, and we had a meeting with the Presbyterian Board of Education, all their teachers and principals and so on, because they fall under the Act.
So the Catholic Education Board, for example?
Absolutely, they get funding from the Ministry of Education. So it tells you how all-encompassing it is, and no one shall escape. As a matter of fact, a number of these public bodies, because they are self-sufficient, they make their own money and they spend their own money, would have sought legal advice to say that they did not fall under the Act. But suffice it to say, they do fall under the Act, and their legal counsel would have said, hey, you fall under the Act. Now, the question we really ask ourselves, why would a public body not want to fall under the Act? Because this is best practice.
Correct.
This is giving accountability for the spend of public money. And that's where we are. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is that a lot of people want to see people behind bars for corrupt practices. Yeah, it caters for that on the Act. But success in public procurement and disposal really means the amount of people that don't go behind bars, the amount of people complying, because that way you save the public purse and you don't have to pay expensive lawyers to defend positions in the court when people go against the Act. So I just wanted to make sure that people understand that everybody who spends public money now falls under the Act. And that's one of the difference between what would have been before. So you would have given a lot of subventions to NGOs and so on, and nobody accounted for it. And we would have had meetings with a number of NGOs. And an example is like the Carnival Development Commission.
Right.
We would have met with Calypsonian Gypsy and his members and so on as early as 2020. So we would have had so far over 305 public sensitization sessions to bring all these organizations into compliance. The question is today, and I'm glad you raised the whole issue of the public outcry. The question is, so out of 400 odd public bodies that we have looked at and scanned the different areas to find out who is a public body, we have 126 who have appointed their named procurement officer. That said, every public body today as we speak do procurement, so they have somebody fulfilling the role.
So therefore, what's the holdback? If 126 out of the 415 that you all would have identified, if only 126 they have complied, what is the issue with the remaining?
Well, there are a number of what we did in early 2020, I believe it was. We would have issued to all the public bodies what we call a readiness assessment. So it's not only about appointing. The first cog in the wheel is to appoint your named procurement officer, because that person is the liaison between the office and the public bodies. So it's a critical person.
And that's obviously a qualified person, someone qualified.
It has to be qualified.
Right.
And when we saw some of the names coming forward, accounts clerk, admin assistant.
That's obviously against the Act.
Well, it's obviously not going to achieve what you're trying to achieve in terms of the quality, because the regulations that we have put in place now and has been passed in Parliament this year in February and January. In the lower house, it was passed in January. In the upper house, it was passed in February. So it's now in the books. And that specifically speaks to do the annual procurement plan, you must have the named procurement officer who is adequately qualified and experienced to perform the duties of the procurement officer.
So at present, not only are there persons who are outside or in contravention of the Act, but there are also persons who have simply just failed to get themselves in order.
I wouldn't say that they are in contravention of the Act, and this is the reason why I will say so, because there are certain parts of the Act that are not proclaimed. So you can't be in contravention if it's not proclaimed.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WESN,
the content capital.
There are also persons who have simply just failed to get themselves in order.
I wouldn't say that they are in contravention of the Act, and this is the reason why I will say so, because there are certain parts of the Act that are not proclaimed. So you can't be in contravention if it's not proclaimed.
Yes.
You may be in contravention of the existing law, the SEMP Manual and the CTB Act, together with your own constitutional document that you would have signed off to or would have governed the operations of your individual public bodies. That said, we have a number of huge organizations, Heritage Petroleum, NGC, Plipdeco, TNTech, WASA. They have all started to operate under the Act. So they're not waiting for full proclamation because they recognize that this is best practice. I'll tell you, we have had several meetings with the Office of the President, and the President is very gung-ho to use a local parlance, that her organization must be in compliance with the Act. So there are individuals and there are a number of ministries that have actually come on board. Now what happens is that in addition to the Act and the regulations, each organization has to be guided by handbooks and guidelines. This is operating procedures. The handbooks, standard SOPs, right? Yes. So we would have issued about 44 of those SOPs. We call them handbooks and guidelines. And we wrote all in the public bodies asking them, you have two options. You can either adopt our handbooks and guidelines that we have issued, or you can take our handbooks and guidelines, tweak it to suit your own individual needs, but it must come back to us and be approved. A number of ministries have accepted wholeheartedly and said, we accept your handbooks and guidelines. So that's another part.
And I think that's important because different ministries would operate differently in terms of the goods that they procure, and obviously it may need to be tailored to the ministries or the public entity's specific need.
I'll give you an example. You have 14 regional corporations in Trinidad. And I believe, subject to correction, 7 is on opposition control and 7 is government.
Yes, 7.
And as many as you have the 14, you have different practices by each one. So that gives you an idea. So what we try to do now is to have one set of handbooks and guidelines to govern the 14 across the board. The same thing with regional health authorities.
But why is that so? Don't they all operate, or they are at least supposed to operate under the same Act?
They're supposed to. But different people interpret these different provisions differently. And you find, and I mean, you would have seen on the news on a regular basis, persons within these organizations being charged for corrupt practices. And that's something that we want to make sure does not happen. So handbooks and guidelines, you have to adopt those. The other thing that you have to do is to appoint certain committees to oversee the procurement activities, to advise the accounting officers. In other words, to advise your head of the organization, whether it's a president or managing director, general manager, or in the ministries, the permanent secretaries. This is what we call a procurement and disposal advisory committee. And they take the recommendations from the named procurement officer, look at it to make sure they are in compliance with the Act, regulation, handbooks and guidelines, and they are following procedures. And then they make a recommendation to the accounting officers, who will then sign off and say, we agree with your recommendation, procure or dispose.
That sounds like a lot. To some people, it may sound convoluted, but it is what's the law at present and based on the regulations. So give us an idea as to the resources. Obviously, with the work that the procurement board has to carry out, it therefore means that you all must be sufficiently funded and sufficiently staffed.
Yeah, we are sufficiently funded, and we have our full complement of staff at this time. And I say at this time because following full proclamation, we have some staff members that we are holding back on recruiting to bring on board because their duties will really only kick in post-proclamation. And post-proclamation, where we have to adjudicate on matters that comes before us in terms of best practice and so on. For breach of the Act, we have a committee that is set up, what we call a challenge committee. And if the suppliers and contractors misbehave for any reason, they don't perform as they should, or they are found to be involved in corrupt or fraudulent practices, or they are in breach of the Act, they can be taken off the list of pre-qualified contractors, off the list for a period of up to 10 years, and in some cases, 10 years, and all their officers will be debarred. This is a new provision under the Act. So you are now required as a public body to make sure you do proper evaluation of your contract. Let me also add here, one of the things that we have done that is required under the Act is that there would be one list of pre-qualified suppliers and contractors to be used by all the public bodies. Previously, all the public bodies used to have their own list. You will see the newspaper.
See that on your website.
That's right.
Mistaken, yes.
Come in, get pre-qualified. So what happens now is that there is one list of pre-qualified contractors. So you don't have to pass anything underneath the table to get pre-qualified. You don't deliberately don't pre-qualify somebody because you don't like them. So once you are pre-qualified, you remain pre-qualified unless you misbehave and you get out of the pre-qualification list. So no longer is everybody going to have their own list of pre-qualified contractors. There is one rule under which Section 29(1), all suppliers and contractors will be pre-qualified. And we have pre-qualified now. We have over 1,100 suppliers and contractors already on the system. And we are waiting for the full proclamation to have them properly pre-qualified. So here you go, over 1,000, and you have to pre-qualify by what we call line of business. So here's the advantage of that. The suppliers and contractors, we are using a universal code. We call it the UNSPSC code developed by the United Nations. So for example, if you have to procure, let's say laptops. Laptops carry a unique code on the UNSP. So when you as a supplier contractor wants to pre-qualify, you say, I want to pre-qualify with UNSP code XYZ that is for laptops. The public body will also say, I want to procure goods under the same code. So therefore there is a match. And when you are reporting now your spend on an annual basis, which you have to report through us, and that goes to Parliament. So everybody who procures laptops in the public domain have to use the same code. So we can run a report now and say how many laptops we procure across the entire public spectrum. So now here is an advantage. You can look at it and say, but why is everybody procuring laptops, stationery, and all these things? Could we consolidate it? Could there be synergies?
Yes.
And there you have the savings, because that's an advantage.
It also
of
eliminates corruption, which is one of the features of the Act.
Absolutely. So those are some of the advantages, and those are things that are already in place. So all the pieces, bits and pieces that is required for full proclamation is already in place at the OPR. We have been trained, and coming to the question you would have raised about the judiciary. We actually, and I want to say publicly, thanks to the Chief Justice, who actually made available to us 10 of his senior judges. I mean, 10 of the best of the best of the best judges. And the Caribbean Court, the CCJ, actually gave us 2 of their judges to train our personnel how to do these hearings and so on.
So let me just stick up in there. The Attorney General would have come out, I think, back in the end of May or probably early June, and he would have mentioned that there are still issues from the judiciary standpoint in terms of full implementation of the Act. Is that one of the issues that he would have cited back then in terms of ensuring that the judges are trained properly?
Well, we are trained by the judges because here's what has been placed in the Act. You have an issue. You don't like how a public body did their pre-qualification, their pre-selection, or their solicitation for a particular tender. And you as a public or you as a supplier contractor believe that it is disadvantageous to you. You won't consider. And therefore, you are most likely you're going to suffer loss. So there is a breach in the Act, and you will suffer loss. You can come to the OPR and say, listen, I need your air. This is my case. So they bring before us a case, and they will produce the evidence. You have to do it in writing. We sit and ask the public body for which they are making the case against to come forward and say, state your case.
So essentially both sides come together.
Both sides come together. Yeah. Now this is an advantage, so you don't go to the court.
So the first avenue is the Office of the Procurement Regulator.
If you are dissatisfied with the Office of Procurement Regulation, and that's why we went through the training with the judges, to make sure we are equipped to carry out the function of a pseudo-judicial function. So you are dissatisfied. There is now a procurement review board that has been established under the revision of the Act, I believe it's in 2016 or 2017.
And this is chaired by?
This is chaired by a retired judge.
Okay, well that's
so
fair
from
enough.
us, you go to the retired judge, and it's a committee of 3. One has to be one with a past judge, retired judge, an engineering background, and a finance background. So there is a review process that you go through this review board, and of course you have a judge. So if you don't like how OPR would have adjudicated, here is a judge, take it to the judge. And then if you're still dissatisfied, you take it to the courts. So there is a buffer to answer your question.
So it's Office of the Procurement Regulator,
review board,
then
up to the court, and it probably may end up in the Privy Council. But there is a specific time frame in which these matters have to be heard. You know, we sit down and we ask ourselves, in these states, somebody is accused of a crime or criminal activities. Literally in 2 tours, they are brought to justice and the case is heard. We have 20 days to adjudicate on that matter. 20 days. And from the day 1, within 3 days, certain things have to happen. Within 7 days, certain things have to happen. Within 14 days, and then we have to give our verbal decision within 20 days.
But Mr. Alcha, a lot of people may be concerned about that because they would say that there are other laws relating to different things which have similar buffers, but it still doesn't function the way in which it is meant to function. What makes the Office of the Procurement Regulator different?
That's why we would have taken the necessary time to be properly trained, educated, and make sure we have all the necessary handbooks and guidelines. We spend a lot of time on the regulations. And we would have had training sessions in this country. I kind of stopped counting. But number of training sessions, and we have those training sessions recorded. So we have trained Manufacturers Association, Contractors Association, Chambers of Commerce. We have trained the public bodies. We've trained them, and we are not supposed to really train under the Act. The Act says we are supposed to develop the training requirements, certification requirements, and so on, under Section 13(1)(b).
And give it to them, and they will do
and give it to them and do it. But we realized there is a huge capacity gap. So we went about from day 1 training, and we have guaranteed, in fact, we are preparing the response to the Attorney General based on the meeting we had with the Attorney General coming out of the meeting or the discourse with the Chief Justice. And all the points that have been raised, and you would have raised those, these are a number of what you call restrictions or stumbling blocks. We are in the process of responding to every single item that was raised. And we believe that there could be a very easy transition into this new act with a phased basis of the proclamation, and we are issuing those in a short order to the Attorney General.
Mr. Lasha, we are almost out of time, but very quickly, I saw an article where you would have mentioned that you think that there should be a timeline. Very, very quickly, because we are out of time. Give us an idea. So why is that? Why do you see a need for the timeline?
Because there are certain things that has to take place. For example, there must be a transition from the Central Tenders Board back to the OPR. And that system, once the Central Tenders Board goes away, all public bodies have to stand on their own 2 feet. You must give them time to operate under those conditions. When you switch from your own the pre-qualification list to the pre-qualification list established by the OPR, there must be a transition period. And we are suggesting approximately 6 months to transition from the old system to the new system. And therefore, to appoint all these committees and so on, to have them upskill and so on, it will take time. And we understand that. And therefore, we will give enough and sufficient time to transition into the new system. So it is not broken. It will not be broken. We have had over 1,000 requests for assistance under the new system from public bodies and responded to 99% of those queries.
Well, hopefully you can respond to the remaining 1%. Mr. Lalchan, thank you so very much for joining us on the program. This has been One and One with me, Kemuel Pascal. Thank you so very much for viewing today's episode. Thank you.
WESN.
Hazel?
Parents need to know what they're signing up the children for.
Mommy, Daddy, I just wanted to ask. God, is that you?
You want to do what?
Multiple sclerosis is a chronic inflammatory condition affecting the central nervous system.
Being with someone who has MS, you have to have a lot of patience. You have to have a lot of faith.
It's difficult to diagnose until I was even in Mount Hope Hospital for about 3 weeks.
See, I'm sitting here, all of a sudden you'll feel like somebody trying to pound some needles or a nail under your foot. That is so painful.
Unfortunately, there is no cure for MS at this point in time.
MS creeps upon you. So I had one attack, and by 4 years after that, I had the second attack, and then they said yes to MS.
The Mary Immaculate Prayer Group and Friends presents its prayer breakfast on August 31st in aid of Monsignor Christian Pereira. The prayer breakfast begins from 9 a.m. at the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception. Cost is only $200. Come support the Cup of Gratitude in aid of Monsignor Pereira, August 31st.
Tickets are available at the parish office of the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception and the parish of Our Lady of Perpetual Help.
I am Rondell Donowa, and you are watching WESN, the Content Capital.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit?
Yes.
What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it.
It is not punitive, it is not rehabilitative.
We the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole, is for all of us in public.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Sight, Thursdays at 11:30 a.m., only on WESN, Content Capital.
I'm joined on set today with Dr. Chelsea Garcia. She's a palliative specialist as well as internal medicine doctor as well as hospice care.
Palliative is for anyone with serious illness, whereas hospice is for someone that may die in the next 6 months. Now, unfortunately, because people confuse the word palliative with hospice, we see a lot of patients presenting late in the course of their illness.
So the first part about holding out the stick is knowing how to hold it. You're only allowed to play with the flat side of the stick. So the ball is not allowed to hit the back of your stick whatsoever.
What's up, Doc? Tuesdays and Thursdays here on WESN, Content Capital.
I'm Andy Johnson, and you're watching WESN, the Content Capital. The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through. Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
I am Kemuel Pascal, and we are WESN, Content Capital.
With society plagued by a host of issues, with debates surrounding our urgent concerns falling short, with questions of our future not always being answered.
The conversation continues. Join me, Kemuel Pascal, as the voice of the youth comes to life. We will confront the controversial topics of today's world to gain answers that are key for a better tomorrow. One and One with me, Kemuel Pascal. Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Only on WESN, Content Capital.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
I am Mahi Sekas, and you are watching WESN, the Content Capital.
AM Prime on WESN, the only place from 6 to 7:30 a.m. where you can get the most analytical